really, I bet the hair stood up on his neck on that one.
Well, I would be kind of really not a happy camper. Even if nobody did anything, I wake up in the morning and realize you're right next to a cemetery. It's not a good place to pull your truck over at night.
No, especially after the events that you just mentioned. He hears the little click and the light comes on in the cab, and that's an indication that somebody's opened your door. Now, I do know that me personally, I'd make sure my doors were double locked. I'm just saying.
Well, how could you imagine? Okay, you're a trucker, and you went to a rest stop. You locked up your cab. You're in the back sleeping. And then you think you're having a dream, only to find out you're actually driving the truck. You have all these patrol cars chasing after you, and you're 15 miles away from that truck stop you parked at. And you don't know how you got there.
I'm going to tell you something. That is spooky. That's kind of like the Harry Turner story from '79 and his UFO incident where he was like teleported. His instruments and gauges showed that he went 80 miles, but then they contradicted because he only went like 15. Or he went 80, but one of the ways. Anyway, it didn't add up. And that's kind of like the same story there you're mentioning. Yeah, that's hard to justify when you experience something like that. That's hard to process.
Well, it is when you consider, James, that you're in the back of the cab. As far as you went to bed.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Now, either he is not a sleepwalker, but a sleep driver or something, because, finding himself 15 miles away from where he went night and having all like 5 patrol cars pursuing him.
Yeah. Can you imagine waking up from, what you're calling sleep driving? What a startling that would be. Even when you're sleepwalking, I've seen people that, they're startled, like, how did I get here? Can you imagine going 70 miles an hour down the highway and you wake up in that situation? That would be, wow.
Well, here's another scary story from a trucker. Invisible person shaking and starting the truck while I was sleeping in the rear.
Oh, my, that's like them stories almost we talk about once in a while with the hitchhikers, almost. Or you're driving along and you look over and somebody just appears there on some of these routes, like Route 66 or some other ones out through West Texas and southwestern United States. But, yeah, the lore goes with that stuff. That's some scary stuff right there. You imagine, Gary, you're driving along, say on your motorcycle, and all of a sudden you feel arms around you, holding on to you. But you're by yourself on a, desolate road up in the woods of nowhere in Washington. What would you do?
I would scream.
Okay.
Well, in this case, the guy was in the back. He grabs his bat because he's thinking somebody's hijacking the truck. Now, don't forget, he heard the door open. He heard and felt the shaking of somebody getting in the cab. It's now started, right? Mm-hmm. So he comes out of his sleeping compartment with his bat. And guess what? There was nobody there.
That's that moment there when you realize there's nobody there, that whole little process there of you trying to process that and then you realize what's going on, that's the part that really kind of stops you in your tracks a little bit.
Yeah. And then another one, a woman gets her decapitated by a wheel of her own truck.
Wow.
She was inspecting the load on the trailer, checking the tires, and somehow the truck went into gear and rolled forward.
Oh, I've heard many of ghost stories throughout years where, and that's a perfect example. If obviously because she got decapitated, she passed on, but a lot of ghosts and legends happen throughout the country where people have died on incidents like that. That's similar to that, and they don't even know they're dead, and so sometimes they're all like in a loop, maybe always forever there, and a lot of people throughout the years will see these spirits doing these things, and it scares a lot of people.
Well, can you imagine, though? I mean, undoubtedly, she's a professional. She had the brakes on. She had it not in gear. But then all of a sudden, it went into gear, and that was the end of her. Now, could you imagine you're a trucker, and you pull off to the side of the road, and you're tired? A lot of these guys, they're regulated how many hours they can ride or drive. So they'll pull over after a certain point to meet federal standards. Could you imagine you hear singing in the front of the cab? Again, you locked the doors. The windows were all rolled up. It was secure. Nobody could get in. It's a late model Kenworth truck. Now you're hearing a woman singing in the front of the cab.
Oh, boy.
Now you are getting scared. You look, and it's nothing there. So you think it's your imagination, James. So you go back to sleep. The next thing you hear is the singing again, which turns into blood-curdling screaming.
It's one thing to hear singing, then when it turns into blood-curdling screaming, that right there sends chills right up your spine. I've heard that before.
Yeah, it would be too. Now you're a trucker, and you have a car. It's white. It keeps following you. And you start getting nervous because every time you pull off to, get fuel, to empty your bladder, get something to eat, coffee, all that stuff. Well, this happened all the way from Southern California to McAllen, Texas. This car kept following him. And then at the very end, the car comes up to the side of him and points a gun at him.
Oh, jeez.
And says, bang, you're dead.
That was nice of him. That's like road rage has continued for many states. That kind of reminds me that, you ever see the movie with the semi? There's no driver in it, but it's following that car around, terrorizing them. I think James Brolin was in or something.
No, who's the guy it did that? He was a cop from Colorado or something. Then he went to New York to work on a case, and all of a sudden his chief police says to, the police of New York, hey, you can have him for a while. And I'm trying to think of the name of him. The guy wore a cowboy hat and all that stuff.
Was that Clint Eastwood movie? Or are you talking about
No,
Dennis
this was
Weaver?
a TV show. It was on, I can't think of the name of it. It was on for a long, many years. But
that was Dennis Weaver. I think,
Dennis
playing the
Weaver.
part.
Yeah. That was a good show. But he played that part where that truck was following him.
Yep, you're right. And that was good. That was a freaky movie. And there was another one, too. I think it was Stacy Keach, similar to that. And there was another one, James Brolin, but it was a car, new semi. But, yeah, that was some, those are bizarre stories. And all them stories, they have some truth in them that is carried on through, well, now we're hearing more different versions of it.
Oh, yeah. Well, a trucker came close to hitting a cardboard box filled with kittens. Somebody decided on a main way to abandon their kittens in a cardboard box in the middle of the road.
That is rotten. What is wrong with people? I got to tell you got to be heartless to put kittens on a middle of a highway in a cardboard box. I mean, that is just rotten. I don't even know where to go with that.
Well, this is not me, but I'm just reading what it says. My dad was a trucker for many years. One time he told me he was at a stoplight, which then after the stoplight, he had to go to a mandatory wait station to be waited in. While he was waiting, a guy in a motorcycle goes by, and he notices something's wrong because the guy's head popped off.
Oh, ouch.
Now, these are like scary type things, and sure, it was a ghost or something. Could you imagine,
Yeah, exactly. Again, that I've heard several different true ghost stories from all over the country through my researches and investigations through my lifetime, all over different areas of the world, from Southwest to Northwest to the Mid-Plains to the Midwest and East Coast. And people who have died suddenly, maybe they don't even know they've died, or tragically. And there was one, I can't remember where it was, but it was about a decapitation. They got decapitated, and it's been seen, the spirit with no head. And so, again, maybe they're repeating, they don't know they're dead, but several people have seen them. And when you see stuff like that, it is shocking. I have actually seen a couple spirits before on roads in the middle of nowhere. I've told you about them before. And that really gets your attention. It's 2 a.m. and you're on a road that's probably 5 miles to the closest house, a dirt road in Bigfoot country, and you're seeing pretty much spirit shadow people walk across this road and stop and look at you. I got to tell you, Gary, the hair on all over you sticks up when that happens.
Oh, yeah. Well, I got this one. I'm sure I've mentioned it a couple times, but I will tell you about this one little story. A trucker out on Route 66, out in the middle of nowhere, late at night, doing a long haul on this road. It was deserted. There was hardly any traffic or anything. And he notices this girl walking with high heels on the side of the road. Now, the first thing he figured, well, you know what? It's not safe to be out in the middle of the night walking around on the side of the road out in the middle of nowhere. So he pulls over. She gets into the cab. They start talking back and forth. He notices her clothes are like 20 years out of date, but he doesn't say anything. And he asks her, what happened? Oh, I got in a fight with my boyfriend, and he just left me out in the middle of nowhere and took off. And the trucker goes, wow, he did that? Yeah. And, well, where were you going? Oh, we were going to go to a dance. Well, the next thing he's talking to her, and then she's not answering. And he turns his head to look, at her again. She's gone. Now, here he is. He's cruising on the road. He hasn't stopped to let her out. The door didn't open. She didn't jump out. So he goes a few miles farther, and he comes up to this small town. And he notices that he comes into this town. There's a cemetery. An old cemetery. So he's really shook up. He stops at the sheriff's department. He goes in there, and he goes, I picked up this girl back 10 miles on the road. And they said, well, what was she dressed like? Oh, she was dressed like in clothes, like in the 60s. And she had long hair and all this stuff. Well, did she give you her name? Yeah, this is blankety blank name. I can't remember the name. So he tells them the name. And they look at each other and they say, well, here's another one. The trucker goes, what do you mean? We hear this about every time there's a full moon. She comes out. And she, gets picked up by a trucker. Anyway, we're going to go on break. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Later tonight, top of the hour, after actually the news break, we have Bruce Maccabee. And we're going to be talking about his latest book, the FBI, CIA, and UFO Connection. So stay tuned. You're listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio.
Scintillas in the stream,